I want you to be very careful about this trap that a lot of product marketers fall into, and it's the uniqueness trap. It's this idea that if you are unique, you have a unique product, you're in a niche market, you're going after a small group of particular customers, that you're going to dominate that space and be more profitable and successful than other companies. And a lot of what's driving this trap for people is a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. Now, before I criticize this, I just want to say blue ocean strategies, sometimes they make perfect sense, but sometimes they aren't. So what do we mean by a blue ocean strategy? Well, it basically means a white space, going into a market where there is not a lot of competition, where there's not a bloodbath of companies fighting each other for customers and for sales. And the idea is if you go into a space where there's not a lot of competition, you have free reign and you'll scoop up all the sales. The problem is that a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, you're pigeonholing yourself into a tiny niche that is worth almost nothing. So even though the customers in that little market love your product, you always get 5-star reviews, etc. Essentially what you've done is what I told you about in the last lecture, which is that you've prioritized relative numbers rather than absolute numbers. So even though your ratings and the percentage of success in that market is very high, your absolute revenue, your absolute number of customers is just too low. And it's very hard to justify investing in tiny niches, because if you invest a lot of money, especially in fixed costs or large marketing campaigns, you need to be able to recoup that. And to recoup that, you need to be in a market that's big enough. So don't fall for the idea that being unique or being in an uncompetitive niche is inherently better. Often it's not. And I want to give you one example. So one of my top selling products was actually very poorly rated, but it was still a top selling product. It was my single top selling product at the time. And why is that? It's because I was in a market that was big enough and had big enough demand. It wasn't that I had the perfect product. It's not that customers absolutely loved it. It's that there was a large enough demand in that market for me to be able to produce an absolute large amount of money, not a relative percentage of people who are satisfied with the product. Another example is book covers. So if you're marketing a nonfiction book, there's a temptation, and this is a temptation with branding and design in general, to go with something unique. Okay, if all your competitors are using blue covers, then you might want to go with pink, for example. Sometimes that works, but sometimes it backfires. So having this attitude of being contrarian and being different, sometimes it pays off. So for example, in value investing with people like Warren Buffett, being contrarian makes sense because you're able to seize undervalued assets, assets that the market doesn't value. They don't see the value in it. You do see it, you're able to be very successful. But in other cases, you really do not want to be contrarian. You want to be a lemming. You want to follow the crowd because the crowd is the market and you want a large market. So for example, with nonfiction books, I've done this where I've hired painters to create very unique, distinctive, eye-catching book covers. The problem is that when they see that, they think it's a fiction book because that's the style that people associate with fiction novels. If you're selling a nonfiction book in a given category, whether that's self-help or business or investing, whatever, people are used to seeing a particular type of thing. They're used to certain colors, they're used to certain topography, they're used to certain icons. So for example, Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek uses this depiction of palm trees, of somebody working along the beach. This is something that other companies that sell to that in that same niche do. the laptop millionaire, somebody on a beach with a laptop. So don't get caught up in this idea that going with a unique cover is somehow superior than just going with the crowd, because there's value in doing something not unique, because it's a signal. It's a psychological signal to people about what it is you're selling. And when people are making split-second decisions about whether to look at your product or not, they're relying on subconscious memories and associations, and you want to reinforce those associations rather than disassociating your product from the niche that you're participating in. Another example is when people sell products on Amazon. There sometimes is a temptation to go with something unique. Oh, I'm only going to sell drying racks, or I'm only going to sell certain little products that fix problems in home appliances. Again, the problem is that the market may just be too small. And if you're selling something too unique, what's going to end up happening is you might sell it to 5 customers who absolutely love your product. You get excellent 5-star reviews, but it's only 5 customers. I would rather have a 3-star product in a large market than a 5-star product in a tiny market that barely makes a dent in my financials. So one of the most successful strategies for Amazon sellers is to look at what's already selling well. And I've just brought up a list here of Amazon bestsellers, like these plushies, for example, and see where you can improve. So for example, if there's a bestseller that has a 3-star review, look at those reviews and see what were deficient about that product. Maybe there's a critical component that was broken. Well, perhaps you could reinforce in your marketing message and your sales page how you have a metal piece where your competitors don't. So participating in markets that are already selling well, where there's already high demand, is often a good strategy. Now, there are some people like Peter Thiel who will say, no, you want to avoid competition, you want to create a monopoly, and he seems to think that it's a bit of a myth that having a lot of competition is an indication of that being a successful niche. I think there's cases where he's correct, and he's operating on a much higher level than a lot of us who don't have the funding to be able to create brand new categories. So in that context, what he's saying is appropriate. But I would say for most people, small, mid-sized companies, where there is competition is actually a sign that there is demand for your product. Now, the other thing I want to point out, and again, this is as somebody who is inherently contrarian. I'm not somebody who likes to follow trends. I find it a bit cheesy. I like to go my own way. I have to recognize that there is big profit to be made in piggybacking on trends. So for example, TikTok is hot. Well, talking about TikTok is going to get you visibility. Using phrases that are particularly hot right now, like product-led growth, even though that terminology doesn't really make sense in the historical context of what we meant when we said something like sales-led, design-led, product-led, it doesn't matter. If the market is going in that direction, and that's the trend in terms of PR, in terms of what people are searching on Google, piggyback off of those trends. Don't try to be unique. Do not fight reality. You want to go with reality, go with the trend, go with the crowd, because you can piggyback off that and you can scrape off some profit for yourself.